ultimately my prediction for Bitcoin, and we'll start off here. This is a great way to start the weekly chart. My prediction for Bitcoin is we're going to end up at the 200-week SMA, which is this green line. Okay, this green line. Now, the 50-week SMA is this red line, 200 is this green line. I think we're going to end up with 200. Well, why is that? Well, there's many reasons for that. One of the reasons is the fact that, well, every time we've had a bear market bottom historically, and not even that, but every time we've had a macro bottom historically, or long-term bottom historically, it has been on the 200-week SMA, and we've never closed one singular weekly candle below that point. So we're talking about not 2 occurrences, we're talking about 3 occurrences. We're talking about 2014 and 2015. So all the way through from January 2015 all the way through to October 2015, we kind of held this 200-week SMA for support, even in wake of a double top, okay, which occurred between here and here. We had a double top, and even in wake of that, we held the 200-week. Okay, then we bounced off of it, and that marked the bear market bottom, and we went all the way up to 20K, our 2017 all-time high. And then up here, or down here, I should say, in 2018, we came all the way down to the 200-week SMA, held it for about 5 months, okay, 5 months of bouncing off of it, and we went up to our mid-bear market high in 2019, and then when that COVID crash happened, which a lot of you would know about, we went down straight into, on this COVID crash, which is very unpredictable price action, and a lot of people would say, well, there was no way to predict where we bottom. Guess where we bottomed? We bottomed on the 200-week SMA, right? We dropped all the way down, and we closed just above the 200-week SMA. So the thing about the 200-week SMA is the best place to historically buy Bitcoin is on the 200-week SMA because we've spent in total, less than 2 days below the 200-week SMA in the total amount of 48 hours, right? Below the 200-week SMA on Bitcoin, 48 hours. So, you know, it's pretty clear that the 200-week SMA is basically the best indicator of a macro bottom that you're going to get, or a long-term bottom that you're going to get on Bitcoin. So buying around or at the 200-week SMA, or even on a wick below the 200-week SMA, is the best long-term move you can possibly make, given the data that goes back 6 or 7 years, okay? So that's 3 macro bottoms on the 200-week. So that's brilliant information. And then taking it a little bit further, right, what we can see, and before we go into this, let's go into the fractal, because in order to understand what I'm about to show you, you need to understand the state of Bitcoin right now in relation to a fractal, right? It doesn't look like that. Let's take it back to the auto chart here, and then we go back to that chart. Okay, so in order to understand what I'm going to show you in a second, you need to understand this. Okay, this is a fractal from, this is a fractal from 2018 of a dead cat bounce. Let's go back to 2018, I'll show you where it's from. All right, so 2018, we topped out at 20K. This is all very important information. We dropped straight down in a similar fashion to what we're doing now, okay? And we came up for a little dead cat bounce here, okay? That is the dead cat bounce fractal that I've applied and scaled to meet the current price action. Okay, as you can see, there's a little bit of contrasting to the fractal that's going on now. We're kind of pumping up a little bit preemptively, but I mean the main point I want to get across is that this September period, all the way up to this November double top, right, was very, very, very similar, basically identical to the 2018 fractal. Even these periods of consolidation, we had 1, 2, 3 periods of consolidation, 4 periods of consolidation. They were all basically the same as the 2018 periods of consolidation. And so the kind of suggestion I'm trying to make here is that, well, you know, I'm not trying to say the fractal is going to play out perfectly. It's going to be exactly the same, because that would suggest we go up to 56K, which I don't think is going to happen. What I am saying is that a similar structure could play out, in which we have long-term consolidation and finally a crash later in the year. Okay. Now, given the macro situation, given what's going on with March and interest rates being risen in March, that kind of takes away from that fractal a little bit. But the point is, the fractal's played out perfectly so far, and whether it plays out or continues to play out is up for interpretation. But the fact is that fractal was a dead cat bounce fractal, and the fact that it's played out perfectly so far indicates that we're in a dead cat bounce. Okay. Now, going back to the chart I was just looking at, and bring it back to the weekly chart, okay, what we can see is another similarity coming in on Bitcoin that supports my kind of target for 200-week SMA. And that is coming from the similarities between the 2018 breakdown and the current breakdown. So first and foremost, we dropped below the 50-week SMA, okay, in 2018, dropped below the 50-week SMA. It took us about 4 weeks to reach the bottom. It took us about a 25% drop to reach the short-term bottom that I've just outlined there. Okay, we bounced back up. We went up 45% in 5 weeks. We rejected off the 50-week, and we ended up for 200 about 6 months later, or 4 months later or something. Okay, So what are we doing now? Well, something very similar. We've dropped below the 50-week SMA. Okay, it took 4 weeks, just as it took in 2018. 32% to the short-term bottom, very similar to 2018. And now we're bouncing up, and we'll look at the daily chart, retest the 50-week SMA for rejection, and then we'll end up at the 200-week within about 3 or 4 months. Okay, or November, or depending on whatever the time frame is. There's lots of different interpretations of time frame, but the point is the structure is very much the same. And this is why I say until we break 48K, because the 50-week right now is at 48K. This is why I say until we break 48K, there is no reason to be bullish on Bitcoin, because for all we know, and there's lots of evidence to support it, for all we know, we are just doing the same thing we did in 2018, based on a fractal and based off a structure. Okay, so that is my prediction for Bitcoin. That is my kind of overall prediction. And now I suppose you could say, well, what about the short term? What's going on in the short term? What about Bitcoin? What's it doing on a daily time frame? What's it doing on a 4-hourly time frame? And I suppose a good place to start with that kind of thing is the 4-hourly time frame. We'll start shortest and end up at the longest. The 4-hourly time frame is showing something very bad for Bitcoin, unfortunately. It is showing clear. Let me get the RSI up. I thought I had it there. It is showing clear bearish divergence on Bitcoin on the RSI. Remove this yellow trend line. I don't know why they put this in. Clear bearish divergence. Okay. Higher highs and lower highs on the RSI. Bearish divergence, very clear. And we're also seeing some form of, I guess you could say it's a descending channel. I would say it's an ascending wedge formation because it's slightly slanted. Okay. And so that would suggest that, hey, this is going to break to the downside. You could also say it's a bull flag, I guess. But I would not say this is a bull flag due to the low volume. I don't think it's going to be a bull flag. I also think because of the long-term structure, as you can see with this long-term pink triangle, is an ascending wedge formation. I don't think it's a bull flag. But the point is, bearish divergence against resistance. Very bearish. Okay, and then heading back to the daily chart and bringing back up the stochastic RSI, because that's very important. I wanted to look at that a bit more. Stochastic RSI. What we can see, we remove the RSI there, is that every time we've had an RSI top, a stochastic RSI top, in the last 4 occurrences, we've had a dump on Bitcoin. Okay, and it's a little bit skeptical when you look at things like or a little bit iffy, I guess you could say, when you look at things like stochastic RSI and try to imply immediate price reversals, because it's not meant for that, and it's actually not a very accurate indicator at all. But essentially, what we've seen here is, for example, here, okay, we saw a top in the stochastic RSI. Immediately after we saw that top, we saw a dump on Bitcoin. Another top here. Immediately after, a dump on Bitcoin. Another top here, okay? Immediately after, a dump on Bitcoin. Another semi-top here. Immediately after, a top on Bitcoin. And what we're seeing right now is some form of top, okay? It hasn't been as quick, hasn't been as precise as the other ones, but the point is some form of top. And then we're taking into the other evidence, right? Taking into account other evidence, because you need other evidence. You can't just look at one indicator. And let me remove some of these yellow lines that I've just drawn in. Well, what we can consider when we're looking at other evidence is the fact that, well, as I said, we're in this long-term, or not long-term, but medium-term since January 6th, ascending wedge formation, which is a bearish structure. During this wedge formation, in which we've been moving upwards, we've had descending volume on the green candles, right? Notice the green candles here. Notice the trend with the green candles. The volume is descending, okay? You can't really draw a trend line across it because volume is not really represented by trend lines, but it's descending volume, right, on the daily candles there, which means that essentially the momentum is not there. The buying pressure is weakening. Okay, I explain this in every video. Same thing with the downside. If we were going down and we had descending volume, that would be a sign that we would be reversing to the upside soon, because it means that sellers are not are getting less and less interested at selling at the current prices than they were the day before. And so it's the same thing with the upside. It's like, well, people are less likely to buy right now at 42K or 43K than they were down here like a week ago at 36. Okay, and that's shown on the volume. And when that happens for too long, there's no actual indicator as to when it needs to flip. But when it happens for too long, it means that the trend's going to reverse. And it's been happening for a while now. And if we went back to 2018, we could show you quite clearly, and we might do this in a second, that on every single dead cat bounce in 2018, and for a matter of fact, every single dead cat bounce in 2014/2015, which is both of the bear market starts in the previous cycles, we had descending volume in an upwards trend. It was only when we started having ascending volume in the upwards trend that we actually broke out of the bear market bottom. So from what I'm seeing, there is no indication that this is not a dead cat bounce at this point. And you'd ask, well, what is the indication that this would not be a dead cat bounce? What is the indication that this is an actual rally that will take us to all-time highs? The indication would be breaking 48K. That is my indication. And even if we did that, say we did that tomorrow by some stroke of the imagination, right? I really don't think it's going to happen, but say we did that tomorrow, right? Well, at that point, you have to wonder, it's like, well, March is soon, interest rates could be risen on the 15th of March. The stock market looks trash. We could enter a recession. So how bullish on Bitcoin can you actually get? And that's what I'm kind of trying to put across here. It's like, even if the technicals looked good, which they don't, how bullish can you logically be on Bitcoin? And so let's look at another few things here. We've got Ichimoku Cloud, and this last daily candle that closed 20 minutes ago just broke below and rejected from the daily candle Ichimoku Cloud. Okay, so there's so many reasons to be bearish on Bitcoin, and there's very, very, very few to be bullish. So we've just dropped below or rejected from the Ichimoku Cloud, extremely bearish. We've just rejected from the Gaussian channel, quite clearly, extremely bearish. Bollinger Bands are on the top side. It means we have a long room to move to the downside. Pretty bearish. Okay, and then, well, let's look at another thing. Let's look at the 50 and 200. This is the only thing I'm seeing is bullish on Bitcoin right now. The fact that we've actually sustained above the 50-day SMA, which isn't much of an achievement. If you look back at the 2018 dead cat bounces, we actually did the same thing. Look back at 2015, we did the same thing. We jumped above the 50-day. Okay, we didn't get above the 200-day, which is a green line. It doesn't mean anything. It's a dead cat bounce. This is what happens in dead cat bounces. Now, the thing with Bitcoin right now is that it's in a position in which it can make a bullish structure. It can retrace back to 40K, and it can do something like this, which is an inverted head and shoulders pattern, right? So if you're actually bullish on Bitcoin, if you want Bitcoin to succeed here, you would kind of hope that it does pull back. But the point is, I don't think that we're going to have the strength remaining in Bitcoin left to swing to the upside once we pull back. I think it's too bearish. I think that it is over for Bitcoin in this cycle. I think that we'll be ending up at 200-week SMA. Okay, that is the simple scenario for Bitcoin, in my opinion. Now, looking at another chart, which is this chart that I've brought up previously, and this I haven't touched this chart for weeks, by the way. I just want to say that I have not touched this chart for weeks, and you can attest to that. My regular viewers can attest to that. This is my prediction for Bitcoin. I previously had two scenarios. One of the scenarios was we kept trending downwards in this channel, which is very unlikely, but I had to outline it because the trend is your friend until it ends, and at that point the trend didn't end. And the other scenario is this, and this is kind of a scenario in which we broke out, and I drew this out a couple of weeks ago, and I said we're probably going to reject from 45.5K, we're probably going to pull back to 40K, and then from that point we can make a decision. Now, the decision is we either retest 48K, which would be in line with the previous fractal I just showed you, in which we reject from the 50-week, because remember we haven't tested the 50-week yet. And so even on this bearish short-term time frame, it is very, very important to note that we're probably going to pull back, I think, but even then, we could retest 48K. And I can tell you right now, this is the period, if this happens, and I think it is slightly likely to happen, this is the period in which we pull back up to 48K that people will get ultra bullish on Bitcoin. Ultra bullish on Bitcoin. Because people would think, hey, we had an inverted head and shoulders pattern, we formed a higher low, and now it's time to moon. And I think we're going to get cut off very sharply from that fractal and from the interest rates being risen in March. So that is a very dangerous zone for Bitcoin. And so this is what I mean when I say things like, even though there's a chance of being bullish, I would not be bullish, right? It's just very, very bearish chart. Because I think that, as I said, there is a chance that we pull back here. And I think it's a very likely chance we pull back here to say 40K. And then from 40K, there's probably a 60 to 70% chance we swing back to 48K for one final move in the dead cat bounce before dropping. I don't think this drop here is going to take us straight to 30K or 20K or whatever. I think we have one more impulse to the upside left. That's just based off time frame until March, and that's based off the fractal. Now, that said, and I want to make this very clear because people love misquoting me, apparently, right? That said, I am not willing to enter any trade, any long position, any short position, because I'm not relying, too much on these predictions. What I am relying on is the fact we're going to end up at 200-week. That's my reliance. That's what I'm relying on. I'm pretty confident we're going to end up at 200-week SMA, okay? I'm not pretty confident that we're going to go to 40K exactly and then go to 48K exactly and then reject. That's not what I'm confident on. That's a prediction. That's based on vague evidence. That's not necessarily, the best prediction I can be able to give you, and that's why I'm not relying on it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, right? Because it's not really a concrete prediction. It's just kind of speculation. If I had to guess, that's what I would guess. But I don't trade based on if I had to guess. I trade based on what I believe to be certainties. Okay. or very high probabilities. And what I see as a very high probability right now is us ending up with 200-week SMA. If we break 48K, we can talk about other scenarios. All right, so that's what I'm looking at for Bitcoin right now on